right. Actually, the pet fish thing is relevant because this is literally one of my favorite things ever. I freaking love this. How many people have seen this? Please raise your hand if you have. All right, so a couple of people. That's great. So it's a fish. It's someone's pet fish, and it's actually driving the car. So what's really cool about this, wherever the fish swims inside the little tank is where the car goes. So now you just have a little sensor, and this is literally ran with an Arduino and a Beagle board. Actually, maybe there's a Raspberry Pi instead of Arduino. I don't remember now. Does anybody remember?
Does the fish know it's driving?
You know, I actually often wonder that because you keep seeing it going further and further away from people. So, but I think this is a really great example of where we're going as a community, because this was really just a couple of guys that were like, hey, we make cool stuff. I want to make really cool stuff for my fish for no reason. So what's great about this is because you can just do this out of nowhere with very little time and very little cost. And that's the beautiful thing about the Internet of Things today, right? Because this really isn't the Internet of Things, right? But it's a good example of how now everything is becoming connected. It just keeps going and going. I love that freaking thing.
Is there like a stare detection, kind of like the
you know,
yeah, so it doesn't...
the prototype somehow ended up downtown Detroit in a drive-by, I think. But no, I don't believe there's any stare detection yet. But that's a really great example of what we can do, right? I mean, this is beautiful technology to have available to us today. So let's take a minute and think a little bit more about the fish in the tank kind of thing. Because now that your car can potentially have a fish in it, and the fish can potentially drive that car, who else is thinking about what other pets could actually be driving my vehicles? Anybody?
Cats.
Cats. Other obvious thing, dogs, right? So I've been having conversations with a lot of people from both sides of the fence here, in the automotive world and also the cellular world, that want to drive these kinds of initiatives, okay? Oh, terrible, right? But no, this is really how they think. They're like, I want to put a dog in a car. Don, I want to put a dog in a car and get it safely to its groomer. The groomer takes it out, grooms the dog, puts it back in, and goes home. Like, this is literally the thing that people want to do within the next couple of years, okay? And so you think about that as a security engineer or just an engineer in general, and you're like, why? Why? Why would you ever waste people's time with this stuff? But think about it. University of Michigan, who y'all is here from U of M? Because I know, wow. I'm going to push you guys a lot tonight because y'all are doing some really cool stuff that I really respect. And one of the things that y'all are doing is you set up the largest living lab for automotive technology in the world. Give yourselves a hand for that, please. No, I'm serious. Give yourselves a hand. Does nobody know about this? Who here knows about that? Okay, a couple of people know about that. So the really exciting thing about that is you can actually take metrics from vehicle-to-vehicle communications, vehicle to infrastructure. You've actually got things in vehicles that say like, hey, I'm going too fast, I'm going too slow, next generation technology, shoots a beam to the car in front of me, I can tell how far it is, or maybe I'm communicating with it. All of these new devices are being tested in this living lab that is right here in your city, which is amazing, okay? And that is the kind of technology and the kind of lab that's going to put dogs in cars. But that's the real thing, because how are you going to test this kind of technology without actually putting a dog in a car? You're building a laboratory like this, and everybody else all over the world, they're building complete BS labs. Those labs are like, oh, we've got a little simulated city in like somebody's backyard, and they're driving around in like golf carts. Totally stupid, right? This is a living lab where people actually have real infrastructure, and people are shipping devices from all over the world here to be tested. That's amazing. It's wonderful. And we're eventually going to get to the whole dog in a car thing. But the security stuff along the way is really kind of concerning to a lot of people. So I won't go through the whole who am I, where am I from spiel, since John did that for me. Well, I'll do that on the next slide.
There we go.
These are my dogs who I want to put in cars eventually. But I grew up in Grand Blanc, so I'm from the Michigan area, sort of. I spent most of my time in Flint, unfortunately. But I'm a musician by background, and I'm an engineer / security analyst by trade. And the reason why I bring that up is because personally I think it's important to have a creative side to engineering perspective, because I think without that creativity, sometimes a lot of the intricacies of security get lost in translation somewhere. So I feel like I've been really lucky to have kind of melted these things together. And one of the benefits of having that creative edge was I've been very, very lucky to have been on the forefront of hacking some technology over the past like 4, 5, 6 years, or what is it, 2014? So you're right, I'm old, dude. It's been a while. But I have hacked a wide range of things, and most of the press that I've been getting is Internet of Things technology, like GPS ankle monitors, and that turned into GPS zoom back, like track your dog, track your family, track your whatever. I also hacked a lot of phones and other mobile technology, but people always bring this up like, dude, I heard you hacked cars. Where's my car, dude? And I'm like, I didn't actually hack cars. There's a very important distinction here, and that's why I bring this up, because if y'all were here last month for Valisec's talk, that guy's a genius, and so is Charlie. And they did an excellent, excellent job of hacking the cars that they've hacked. But they hack cars, whereas I hack Internet of Things primarily. And what I did was I took a security module that was designed as an Internet of Things device that was put in a car, and then I hacked that over its APN, or its Internet of Things network. And that allowed me to not only compromise the car that we targeted, but it allowed me to compromise the over 500,000 cars across the United States that had that module in it. So I could have owned every car at once on that network. And it was bizarre because I actually had a way where I could sense every single vehicle that was online in the infrastructure at the time that I was online. And at one point, I think the largest number was 382,000. So that gives you an idea. If things are set up incorrectly, things can go very, very badly. And while I wasn't able to actually, depress the brake and simulate somebody driving off remotely, I could have. I didn't go that far, but I could have because of these guys. These guys proved that once you have access to the CAN bus and certain messages in certain CAN bus systems can be simulated, you can then simulate, I've just depressed the brake. You should totally allow that engine to drive off now, right? Whereas otherwise, there's a physical limitation where you have to be physically pressing the brake in order to drive off with the vehicle. But I was able to, start the engine, unlock the doors, pop the trunk, everything else except drive the car off. So thanks to Charlie and Chris's research, I was able to actually bridge my research with the physical world much, much tighter, right? And I'm lingering on this slide for a little bit because there's something really important that I want to bring up here, okay? Everybody that's involved in Internet of Things always says to me, Don, what Charlie and Chris did is really excellent, and I'm so glad to see that they've done this. But as somebody that's overseeing this at large automotive company, whatever, I don't really think it affects me because it's a physical, local attack. Somebody's got to be at that car in order to accomplish that. My response to that has always been, let me buy a beer. Because they don't understand that there are internet links, like the Internet of Things, that bring that functionality to them. So yeah, now there is a big security threat that's opened up to everybody, and it's not just, somebody might unlock a door and steal a purse out of it. It's like, no, somebody could carjack you in the middle of you driving, or cause you to drive off a cliff. Those are horrible things, but they're realistic, real things that we have to deal with now, right? So when I hear people say that and the executives try to tell me like, no, Don, this is a physical issue. We don't really have to be concerned about that. It's not just the Internet of Things cellular connection, the OnStar connection, the Viper security module, the whatever. It's also your Bluetooth and your TPM module and everything else that is potentially RF enabled, right? And that does include key fobs in a lot of instances where key fob technology is actually getting more robust. And I'm sure there are some people in this audience that could elaborate on that a little bit further, but I'm sure they don't want to. So just to give you a touch of how I've kind of focused on all of this and gotten all this information on IoT, it's primarily because of DARPA. Now, I did mention that I have been hacking IoT things for quite a few years. DARPA, however, through Cyber Fast Track, actually gave me a very large sponsorship to work on IoT for a year, and that's all I did for an entire year, was just hack everything I could get my hands on. So I spent almost $100,000 just on Internet of Things technology. I would have spent more, but that was pretty much our budget. And we had 0 day on everything we touched. And we're talking about not just simple things that go in cars, but also things that automate, SCADA environments, or automate water plants, automate all the kinds of things that run our society, and not just things that we interact with on a daily basis, things in the infrastructure that we never even think about, that are requirements for us to live effectively and efficiently and safely, right? And that kind of made me a little bit nervous. So I did what a lot of people do when they first get into IoT security, which is I started flailing my hands and saying, oh my God, we're all gonna die. But this is not actually the case, because when you start hacking Internet of Things technology, you start to get a little bit nervous. But then when you see what all of these people, manufacturers and organizations are doing to beef up security, it actually becomes a lot smoother. And I got a lot less worried. So what I want to start with are the components of IoT. Now, granted, this is all from the DARPA research, so this is based on, we profiled somewhere between 100 and 200 companies. I didn't do most of the profiling, that was a lot my business partner Matthew. But it's somewhere between that number. And we found a very solid number of organizations that at that time in 2012 were producing very high quality Internet of Things technology. And we stuck with that 100-some organizations, and we analyzed all the technology we could from them. We acquired the hardware, we acquired the software, we did what we could, we begged, we borrowed, we stole. There's even one case where we actually did research just through the FCC filings, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because we were actually able to own quite a few things just from the FCC filings. So the components themselves are surprisingly simple, right? And this is like a pretty basic IoT thing. You have very simplistic modules. Those modules fit into something physical that you want to interact with, right? So this is a cool thing, but it's also very interesting from a security point of view, because now instead of just owning one piece of technology, you can own massive different pieces of manufacturing equipment, all by looking at one component. Now, this is no surprise to anybody that understands how components work. That's what components are. They're mass produced, and then they're shipped out to a bunch of people. In Internet of Things, it's a little bit different, because now all these things are presented remotely to somebody in a very conformed way, right? So we were able to look at a lot of legacy and modern M2M technology, which Internet of Things and M2M, I use those words interchangeably. So excuse me if I'm throwing those terms around mixed. But this is pretty much the standard high-level thing, right? Like you've got high-level components and low-level components. The high-level components to us are just your basic gateway and then your basic module that's out somewhere in the field, okay? The high-level gateway is just the usual crap. Oh, I've got a router and it's got Wi-Fi in it, or it's got cellular in it, whatever. That's the thing that uplinks you, blah, 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 okay? The low-level components, these are where things get a little bit more interesting, but they're harder to interface with, right? This is where things get owned very, very heavily. The high-level components themselves are always composed of the same crap. But this is where things get interesting, because now you've got like, oh, this particular baseband module has a vulnerability in it, and everybody uses it. Okay, so now I may not be able to actually hack this one application, but I can hack its baseband, and everybody knows basebands are designed to be remotely accessible because it's RF technology, right? So there you go. We have different classifications, and we built laboratories and examples to drive all of the auditing of this technology. So in our reports to DARPA, we basically said, we put together a how-to on how to analyze every single type of high-level component, every single type of low-level component that you can throw at an Internet of Things device, and put it all in our little report, and basically said, here are the 0 days, and et cetera, that we're finding. And I'm going to get into that a little bit, because I think that's where the interesting stuff is. Eventually, my iPad's working really slow. Did you own me, John?
Maybe.
Yeah, I know what you're doing right now. So the network components are also really important, right? Because the APN itself is probably the most vulnerable point in the Internet of Things network. And this is shifting a little bit from what people typically thought was the vulnerability point in Internet of Things, which is like the local network, right? It's true, yeah, the local network is a problem, but the APNs are actually a bigger problem. We found in every single vulnerability or every single device that we owned with an APN connection that wasn't just directly connected to some like cloud network. Anything that had a cellular satellite device in the middle of it could definitely be owned through the APN through a range of vulnerabilities. And again, I'll talk about the specific vulnerabilities in a bit. Seriously, why are you so slow? So this is a little slide to give you an idea of how we looked at Internet of Things as a whole, right? And this should be fairly representative of what Internet of Things is. You've got a product in the middle. Who cares what that is? Because honestly, the product is separate, right? So it's really important in Internet of Things security, we identified, to ignore the product. You ignore two things, the product and the web front end. And why do you do that? Because the web front end can be driven through any old crap, and if they're using PHP, they're going to get owned anyway. So just ignore that and focus on the actual IoT technology, which is primarily most relevant red cellular software in the product itself. By software, I'm not talking again about web. I'm talking about what's actually on the firmware of the device that you're targeting. Okay? And then everything else around it is really the capillary technology or the primary network technology that drives this stuff, right? And cellular is where you're most vulnerable, either the cellular module itself or the infrastructure. That's absolutely 100% the primary place where we were able to break into every single device that we looked at that had that functionality. Interestingly enough, we thought we're going to have to put SIM technology there as well, because it's actually separate from the cellular module. You know, in a lot of cases, and depending on the cellular technology, you may or may not have a SIM card, right? But people that use SIM cards use them in very strange ways. And I'm going to talk about this as well, because SIM is not security, right? S should not mean security in people's minds. For some reason it does. It really should not. It should mean internal security to that module itself. This is not a way to solve your security problems on the network. Everybody thinks that it is. Well, it was more important once we broke down how these different areas of technology were relevant to actually identify what the percentage of use is for each one of these pieces of technology, right? And obviously you can see here, cellular is the primary thing. I mean, you got to understand where IoT comes from, right? I mean, it was initially called M2M, and it's been around since the mid-90s, even the early 90s. There are even some cases of Internet of Things being used in the late 80s, right? And really what it initially was radio technology that was uplinked to some kind of central place that would then communicate or relay messages back and forth to some kind of authority. This was initially used for what? Shipping, right? You've got big, huge rigs of trucks shipping all across the United States, and they were getting jacked, things were getting stolen, blah, 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 right? People with a lot of money said, I'm sick of losing tiny bits of dollars here and there. So what I'm going to do is make sure that absolutely nobody's touching my equipment from here to here, right? That's literally how telematics was born. And that's literally what drove the Internet of Things. So it's no surprise that satellite is really low now, but cellular is off the charts. Because what do we have now? Obviously one of the best cellular infrastructures in the world, and it's cheap now. So they're clearly going to push that. Satellite's still used a lot, especially for ships, things of that nature, but it's getting less and less necessary. You're not going to use satellite unless you have a really hardcore piece of infrastructure that needs to be out in some really rural area. And there are only certain types of trucks, even today in telematics, that use satellite because they have really, really expensive payloads. You can probably guess who's driving those. So the capillary communication technology itself is almost as important in the software. And we thought that was fascinating because capillary communication technology, I mean, this is your Zigbee, your Bluetooth, your whatever, all the low pan technologies that you usually don't think of are really important here. And they're almost as important as software because that's where people are making all their money. They're saying, well, now you can connect it with blah, blah, blah. This is going to, connect your, garage door to your TV. Won't that be great, right? This is how people think they're going to make their money. So this is how they're breaking things down. So we took all of these pieces of technology and kind of mapped the companies that were most interesting in that particular technology area and plopped them into graphs like this and charts and everything like that. And this is how we identified what components are going to be most interesting based on the relevancy of that particular technology and the area of importance of the overall, identified area of Internet of Things. So you can see, I don't know if you probably can't read this because these are actually pretty small for slides, but it looked great in the report to DARPA. But anyway, so all of these organizations, we had at least one thing from each one of these guys. So it gave us a really, really good idea of how things were spread out and how things were broke down across industry, right? So this is what the other important thing in IoT is. Used to, you would have two primary areas in IoT, and it's pretty much telematics and e-health. Smart grids came a little bit later, but people were primarily concerned about two things, money and their health, right? And so obviously e-health was up there very early on. Telematics obviously is the most. Smart grids were the most important to us because we're more infrastructure guys. We're not really more like, I want to save your washing machine guys. So obviously we're more interested in what drives that kind of stuff. So heavy into Zigbee. The technology usage was also really kind of cool because this gave us a better idea of where to target. And obviously with capillary communication, you can see all across the board, it's pretty much used almost the same percentage. But software and cellular, they vary a little bit more than you would think. And that's pretty cool stuff in my opinion when you look at the stats. So profiling all these companies allowed us to get a really, really quick idea of what we should target, when we should target, and how much it's going to cost. Not to us, as in buying the stuff, but how much it's going to cost the community. As in, like, if you buy this today for your company, or you buy this for, the infrastructure you're driving for the city, how much is it going to cost you if you get owned, right? And by breaking down each component into not only who makes it, but what technology manufactures it, as in, like, is it Myanmar, or is it, Thailand, or is it China, or is it the US? Whoever fabs this stuff has an effect on the security. And whoever actually puts this stuff into infrastructure is making the decision to accept that technology has been rated as okay by whoever's manufacturing it. And we've been hearing a lot about that lately in backdoored like Cisco technology or whatever. But this is going to be a bigger and bigger concern with Internet of Things because we're so physically connected and our physical world is going to be so dependent on these technologies being potentially backdoored. So now you have the ability, by analyzing the market, to actually analyze the potential cost of a vulnerability affecting not just a marketplace, but an actual area of infrastructure. And the most shocking thing, in my opinion, was the change in dynamic in the offensive threat in Internet of Things, because it's no longer physical security is the most prone to exploitation. It's actually, in Internet of Things, the more remote you are, the more likely you're going to get owned, which was absolutely fascinating to me. So we're basically flipping the paradigm on its head from desktops and laptops. They're like, oh, well, you're more likely to get owned if somebody is compromising you locally. Not with IoT. If you're IoT enabled and you've got an APN, I guarantee it can get owned within probably an hour. When I did the initial Internet of Things computer security or car security module hack, it literally took 2 hours for me to compromise it through the APN. And that is with one GSM USB stick that I plugged into my Linux laptop. I just threw a SIM card on there, and then maybe an hour later I'd reverse engineer the protocol and it was done. And I'm not saying that to make myself sound cool, because I'm sure any of y'all could have done the same thing, because it really wasn't that hard, right? And that's the thing that makes me nervous, or made me so nervous and hand flailing initially. Because if it's this easy for a guy like me to do it, what about the people that have PhDs in this technology? And not just from the United States, but from all over the world. Like, who's thinking about what we're using, blah, blah, blah. It can get a little bit overwhelming. But when I started really thinking about the 0-day and what's involved in securing it and where the market is going today, I started actually to get a little bit of an ease of mind. And that might sound weird, thinking like, well, Don, you're generating tons of 0-day. Wouldn't that make you more nervous? Actually not. So let's talk a little bit about some of these things. Okay. Who here has actually performed glitching attacks? There's got to be one hardware guy in here. No? All right. So is anybody familiar with what glitching is? Can you tell us, please?
You cause the device to act out of spec. You violate timing, so you can get it to go to some weird state in a state machine.
Exactly.
I believe it's used to hack like the PS3 or something like.
Was it really?
The game console was hacked.
We invited Johan and he couldn't show up.
Well, yeah, I actually didn't know that about the PS3, but that's pretty badass if that's true.
That was like memory bus glitching to invalidate some of the code signing they had.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's sick. That's cool. Yeah, I didn't even know that. I mean, usually I use glitching just to bypass so in Internet of Things, as you guys probably know, a lot of people use really, really cheap microcontrollers. A lot of these microcontrollers are not super robust from a security perspective. It's really easy to use glitching to get the CPU or the processor inside the microprocessor to say, oh, hey, the voltage is low enough that the lock that should be at a certain voltage is not at that voltage, therefore it's not locked, and I'll give you my firmware. Right? So that basically just allows you to download firmware from anything you want to, and then you pretty much have keys to the kingdom at that point, right? Because they're all your crypto keys, all the software. Obviously, you can reverse engineer it, whatever you want. And glitching is a fascinating application for that. And I learned it, again, because of microcontrollers, primarily because of Travis Goodspeed, who is a genius in his own right. But he's the guy that actually got me to start glitching in the first place. This is a different way to look at glitching. This would be remote glitching or over-the-air glitching, which in a way is kind of mind-blowing. I came up with the idea, so I will happily take credit for that, but I am not an EE, nor am I a PhD, so I cannot implement this. But there is a gentleman who, so the research is pending on this actually occurring. So I'm not going to really talk too much detail about it, but I will talk about the theory, which is basically like you have a bus that is both accessible over RF and over something else. And this is great for EEPROMs. Shoot, I thought that slide was next. But anyway, there's a certain type of EEPROM that now is accessible to pretty much everybody that wants to implement some kind of new RF technology. Like scan this, and it's an inventory thing. So it's basically an EEPROM that now also has, instead of I2C, it also has RFID capability. Now the interesting thing about this is they're both, the RFID and the EEPROM are on the same, basically on the same voltage channel, right? So it's ideally, in a way, the same bus. It is, but it's not, right? But the voltage is affected enough that by driving voltage too high and too low over the RF side, you're actually able to affect the EEPROM side. So now you can effectively start leaking memory over the RF channel by performing glitching attacks on the EEPROM over RF, which is surreal, but apparently it works. Like I said, I haven't been able to accomplish it because I suck at RF, but apparently it works. There's a certain type of module made by ST that apparently is vulnerable to this, and it's really exciting to know that it's working, but more technology is going to be susceptible to this because a lot of these different types of technology are being brought, meshed together, right? And I'll talk about that in a little bit because there are other pieces of technology that are being meshed in dangerous ways as well. Cellular basebands were a really, really big problem when we were doing our Internet of Things research. And a lot of people have done cellular baseband attacks in the past few years. Ralph Philip Wyman is one of them, who is an absolutely exceptional security engineer. So he's been able to perform some really good stuff. We were not getting to his level on this because we didn't need to. Cellular basebands and Internet of Things, super easy to hack. And there are two reasons, well actually there are three reasons for this. Number one, they all have TCP, well most of them have TCP IP stacks. And those TCP IP stacks are actually outsourced. The outsourced code is all C libraries that are very poorly written. So if you have like an OpenBTS or an OpenBSC system, just get these basebands, get the test applications for them, throw them on your OpenBSC network, and just start drilling them with different kinds of packets. The TCP IP stack will fault all the time. And you can basically just pick up with a debugger, exactly where it faulted, and boom, there you go. So you have the ability to actually exploit baseband firmware over TCP IP in Internet of Things. There's another vulnerability that we really didn't understand why it was even there. But everybody's probably not going to be surprised by this. And it's just certificate management. Like, oh, they've got a TCP IP stack. Okay. So they also integrate SSL. And they've got TLS. Like, that sounds like a great thing. It's really marketing, right? They want to be the IoT people that say, hey, we have a baseband that has SSL and TLS available. You should totally use this baseband. Nobody uses a root certificate store at all. So great, crypto is wonderful. It's a great thing, but it's not getting anybody anywhere, right? If you can man in the middle of the connection with anybody can with an OpenBTS system, then too bad. It's worthless. So now the SSL TLS implementation you have at your water treatment facility, it's uplinked to my van sitting outside, and I'm telling it, here, have a certificate, and it's fine. Like, this is the kind of ridiculousness that you're seeing in basebands. Like, this is how bad it can really get. And there were other issues, like over-the-air firmware updates. Over-the-air firmware updates, we're going over TCP IP, over an SSL connection. That didn't have a root security store. So, signed things are awesome, but when they're signed with, poorly validated certificates, it means nothing. So again, a lot of this is actually unfortunate marketing or software being set up for long term. And that's where I started to get a little bit more satisfied with the state of the Internet of Things, because I realized, okay, I'm not just seeing this as ridiculous engineering. I'm seeing this from a security analyst point of view. I'm not seeing this from the engineer's point of view. The engineer is saying, we don't have room for a root security or root certificate store here yet. But in a year, when we make enough money to start building modules with enough memory, we'll have one, right? So I was just unlucky enough, I guess you could say, to hit this technology right in between these two phases, right? And I started reaching out to organizations like Centurion, Gemalto, and all the other baseband companies, and they're like, yeah, we know. I'm like, well, if you know, like, what's your plan for this? And like, oh, don't worry about it. We got it taken care of. You're just a hacker. Like, oh, okay. Like, well, it actually made sense, because at first I was kind of offended, but really when it comes down to it, they're right. They have a plan, they have a roadmap for it, and they actually say, like, no, we're not just giving you, lip service. We actually care about implementing this, and we have a roadmap to do so. So if you trust us to actually stick with that, then eventually we're going to adhere to what we're doing. In fact, Gemalto and Centurion, if you guys don't know, Gemalto is the parent company of Centurion. Gemalto primarily does like SIM cards and identity and stuff like that, and Centurion makes all the basebands. Well, Gemalto is doing some really awesome stuff with SIM cards, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, because that's actually really, really important. Oh, there it is. Why did I not put those slides together? That's ridiculous. Anyway, this is the ST that has the dual interface EEPROM, if you are interested. You want to go look this up. It's actually really cool, and you can get test modules with this. Really easy to play with. So this is probably one of the coolest things that came up in our DARPA research. And it was funny enough, too, because I called this occurring in 2010. I had a conversation with the AT&T executives, and I said, I guarantee you, within 3 years, somebody's going to hack GPS. And they were like, why? That's stupid, Don. Nobody wants to hack GPS. I'm like, well, think about it. There are a lot of reasons to hack GPS, and it's not just because of location. Like, forget about location stuff for a second. Let's think that location technology doesn't, like the location aspects of GPS don't even exist, right? Ignore that for a second. What's the other benefit of GPS? Exactly. Time. The other thing that's really important is it's on the exact same die as your baseband. So if you can't own the baseband, you can own GPS. And GPS is very, very accessible, the firmware is. Where a lot of manufacturers like Centurion, they would never even give me one of their firmware images, right? And if they did, it'd be encrypted and signed, and I wouldn't be able to look at any of it. But people just post their GPS firmware online, completely unencrypted, unsigned. They're just like, here, have this. It's totally fine. Don't even worry about it. And these are organizations that are starting to put the GPS firmware or the GPS baseband on the exact same baseband as the cellular firmware, right? So now they actually share one processor with two different RF interfaces. Obviously, they need two different RF interfaces, but you get where I'm going with this, right? The meshing of this technology, like with the EEPROM, where you see these two disparate technologies that normally would never really go together, are being meshed together because it sounds like a good idea for applications. The idea of GPS and cellular being bonded is a brilliant idea because you have timing, right? And that also affects the cellular. So if you think like, oh, well, I'm going to exploit the timing of GPS, and now you can actually affect the GPS the GSM or CDMA chipset itself, like those are really important things. The meshing of this stuff together makes a lot more sense with GPS and cellular, but it's the bonding of this stuff that's creating the insecurity in ways that we're not really expecting. People thought, oh, well, there's no reason to hack GPS, but if you have access to the firmware and find integer overflows, which there are a lot of in GPS firmware, then it might be really possible because it really is just an ARM chip. So even if they're not separate dies, everybody's hacking ARM now. That's not a surprise. So why is it a surprise that this would occur? There was a CMU team that actually pulled this off, hacking the firmware. So remote code execution 0-day over GPS channel, I think last year sometime, which was absolutely exceptional to see. I was really impressed. And obviously, if you've heard, there's a publicized attack against GPS where some professor down like University of Arizona or something had like a land attack against a drone and then either diverted or downed the drone. I can't remember what it was. But obviously, these things are becoming more and more of a problem because of the meshing of the technology. We were super dependent on GPS, right? GPS is clear channel. There's no security key unless you're military. And now that's becoming a serious issue because nobody thought, nobody's going to use this as security technology for civilian infrastructure. Well, there you go. There are people that are implementing, just so you know, this isn't really IoT pertinent, but there are people that have recently come up with 0-day for CDMA and GSM cell towers by triggering vulnerabilities in the timing by hacking GPS. So if you're very familiar with CDMA and the timing that's required to maintain a stable CDMA connection, you can actually take out an entire cell by messing with the GPS time of one tower in that cell, which is fascinating to me. But it's interesting that you can blow out an entire cell with just fudged GPS. MIMs are really cool. Anybody here know what a MIM is or have access to MIM technology? Okay, so this is the next step of SIM technology, right? A SIM is generally for your phone. A MIM is supposed to be for your machine, right? So it's machine identification module. MIMs are really cool because no longer do you have this SIM module that you can just take out and throw on your phone, right? And this is the issue, or was the issue, for a lot of people getting into IoT. How many people have heard about the, I think it was like $200,000 in money stolen from an internet cellular service provider in New Zealand? Anybody? All right, this is the funniest thing ever. So this lady is like sitting at home and she has very little money and she's super, super bored. And she's like, I really want to watch the latest TV of whatever my favorite thing is, probably Twilight. And she was like, how am I going to get access to this? Because Twilight's super awesome and I have no money to watch it. So what she ended up doing was she cracked open some of her, the new power modules that are Internet of Things enabled. So basically the meter on your house. She cracked it open, it has a SIM card in it. She takes the SIM card out, puts it in a modem, throws it in her laptop, Twilight all freaking day, right? The worst part about it, within a month, she had racked up something like $250,000 in download fees, right? Just bizarre amounts of money because she didn't realize that somebody's watching the activity on that card, right? People need to know that. They're maintaining a watchful eye over these things because they know that somebody's going to rip it off. It's a SIM card. They can pop it out. And there was another story of down in South Africa, there were some riots. Sorry?
What happened to her?
She's in a lot of trouble. She has to pay the money back, but she can't. So I think she's going to do a couple years in jail. But,
So she should have gotten her neighbors.
she should have gotten her neighbor's SIM card. Like Joe did it next door. Don't look at me. Twilight's totally awesome though, right? No, but I mean, this is the problem that people have with getting into this stuff, because you have these things that you think are primary identification or security technologies, that when you put them in these situations, they just don't work, right? So MIM is supposed to take a care of that, because there was another example of down in South Africa when there were riots a couple of years ago. People were rioting. I think it had to do with they didn't have access to cellular technology for cheap, and people in the locations, or what we would consider slums, down there started getting really, really angry and started tearing down the city infrastructure around them because they were mad at the city for whatever reason. Well, they started tearing down traffic lights. Inside the traffic lights, they realized, hey, there's a SIM card in it. So then all across the city, people were stealing and then using these SIM cards to make phone calls, to other countries and their friends and whatever. So there are a bunch of things that are wrong with this. Number one, it's usually unrestricted internet downloads, because these things have to be able to communicate to the network, whenever and how much they want to. They have to be unimpeded to do that. So these SIM cards really don't have any limits on them. And a lot of people don't realize that they really shouldn't be enabled with call capability. So that was initially a problem for a really long time. That's less so today because of the operators and Internet of Things. You've got a new group of organizations now whose sole purpose it is to run cellular networks for Internet of Things. And they'll give you provisioned SIM cards that have data-only access by default now and no phone calls. But back then, that was a couple of years ago, they were all over the place. And even in the United States, you could pop that stuff open and pretty much just make calls to all your buddies in Afghanistan, whatever you wanted to. So people are getting smarter. But again, this is why I'm getting less and less concerned about this. The MIM is a great step in that direction, because as a machine identification module, it's not meant to be removed from the system, right? So it's actually soldered onto the board and has a hard line directly to whatever. Well, we came across a couple of these in our research, and my first thought was, oh, it's soldered on. That's so hard to hack. But really, I didn't even have to desolder it, right? Because it wasn't an issue of desoldering. It was really just like, okay, take a heat gun and then pop up the TX and RX lines because there's no encryption at all, and then just redirect it to my SIM card, which is just a regular SIM card. So there are a couple of different attacks here, right? The number one attack is going to be just removing the stupid SIM card. The most interesting attack that I found is that people are using SIM cards, not just identification for the network, but identification for the firmware. So they'll say, oh, hey, my firmware is bootstrapping. I'm going to check my devices and see which one is actually tampered with, right? It sees the SIM card, say, oh, it hasn't been changed, it hasn't been removed, so therefore that's the valid SIM card. Well, all you have to do is take an Osmocom BB SIM card and program it with the same public IDs, because again, a SIM card is only security to the SIM, not to anybody else, because the firmware has no idea what the private keys are in that SIM. So as long as you present the exact same public keys or the public identifiers, the firmware has no idea. So you can configure the private keys with your own private keys and then change some of the parameters that aren't being checked by the firmware, like, oh, my network ID is 00101, like the test network for OpenBTS, and now it has the rest of the identification correctly set on that SIM card that you've programmed, but is connecting to your cellular network, and now you're rerouting the traffic through you. Super easy to do, really effective, because now you're man-in-the-middling all the traffic. Another issue with that is that they trust the SIM card too much. So people were not buying the more expensive SSL TLS enabled basebands because they were like, as long as we can trust the SIM, we can trust the network. Well, you can't trust the SIM. Only the network can trust the SIM. So you're owned. Sorry. It takes you no time. There's an improvement here. Centurion has come up with a way to store a root certificate chain on a SIM card. And of course, this just required a simple increase of memory and a couple other tweaks to their C library and some of their Java code for the API. But they have it coming, and it's actually going to be coming out for Internet of Things. That is absolutely imperative for anybody doing IoT work, because this will not get you owned, right? If you use it, because there is a way now that firmware can use the API and actually identify, okay, I have a secure communication with the SIM card. I'm able to communicate with it without knowing, or with knowing that I'm not being man in the middle, and then any value that's on that SIM I can then ensure is being trafficked to the network securely. So that's a very simple way that without a change in the baseband, you can now use SIM card technology to authenticate the firmware as well as the SIM card as well as the network, right? Really easy chain. So whenever certain Centurion gets to that point of releasing it, that will be a huge increase in internet security for Internet of Things. And the MIM is an excellent step in that. GPRS, a lot of people think it's pointless to hack, but GPRS is actually really important because everything still uses it, right? Even if you have basebands for Internet of Things that are meant to be LTE enabled, 3G, whatever, they all have GPRS stacks in them, right? And this is imperative to know because not a lot of people, for some reason, I don't even know why, they don't know this. In fact, your iPhone 5, everybody's like, oh, well, it's LTE, blah. Can't use any GPRS or GSM attacks on it. Of course you can, because the stack is still there. And more importantly, it's all legacy code. Like, I mean, what do you think? Just because they have a new baseband coming out, they're going to update all their legacy code for it? No. It's the same libraries that they've been using for 10 years, because why change it, right? It runs exactly the same. So all the 0-day that people have been using for the past 5 years against the Centurion baseband is going to be applicable to your LTE baseband if they have a jammer. So something to keep in mind, right? Don't put too much credit on your Centurion module or whatever module you have, regardless of them getting better. Business weaknesses are also extremely important, and I have to bring this up because in Internet of Things, everybody's a player, right? And the reason why I say this is because you have the network operator, you've got the cloud service operator, you've got the actual cellular carrier, you've got the SIM manufacturer, you've got the hardware manufacturer, you've got the software designer, you've got the web API, you've got the APN monitor. It goes on and on and on. And these are always usually, well, always usually, these are usually completely different organizations that are managing all this different equipment, right? Do you think they have trouble playing in the same sandbox? Of course they do. Their engineering teams squabble, their security teams squabble, somebody thinks an important, a high critical risk, another team is like, whatever, right? These same issues that you see in organizations are more prominent in IoT because there are more people playing in the same pool, right? They're all swimming and everybody's smacking each other in the face when they're trying to go for the butterfly stroke. It's impossible to get anything done, which is another excellent reason why the APN itself, or the network, the cellular network, is such a point of vulnerability, because that's where they all talk to each other, right? APNs are basically the DMZ. They're supposed to be the DMZ for Internet of Things and cellular. It's basically the war zone. It's not the DMZ at all. It's the opposite of what you would think, because everybody's trying to grab a piece of that, because the APN is where you make the most money, right? Because Internet of Things is based on what? Communication. Nobody gives a damn if you have an Internet of Things piece of technology and it connects your fish to a car that can then turn on the washer for you at a specific time of day. Nobody cares what your application is. What they care about is how much traffic are you pushing through my network? How much money am I making off of each kilobyte that you're shoving through my network? How many users do you have? How many users are you spanned across, the Midwest, the Middle East, the whatever? That's how they're making their dollars. So everybody wants to fight for a piece of the APN because the APN defines where the money is being routed, who it's being routed to, who the information is owned by, right? Because maybe the information you're routing through the APN isn't even owned by you. Maybe it's owned by the person who hosts your cloud service. Maybe it's the person that owns your APN. Maybe it's the person that runs your MVNO, right? Nobody really knows, and a lot of people have different shares of that information because they want to take that information and use it to make money as well. Like, oh, Sally just loaded, just bought 4 more boxes of detergent because her washer automatically did that for her over an Internet of Things channel. They want to own that information because the marketing information is resellable, right? So the APN is the war zone, not because it's a terrible place to be security-wise, because everybody's fighting for a piece of it. When everybody's fighting for a piece of something, it doesn't get secured, right? So that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at Internet of Things deployment, right? And that's not all we did when it comes to, owning things. Obviously, in owning things, we had to develop things to own things, right? So we didn't have the luxury of just doing whatever we wanted with whatever we wanted. We had to do a couple of things that were already done before. Like this is a good example. If you've ever hacked Zigbee, you've probably used one of the RZ Raven USB modules, which are awesome. They're great, but they have terrible, terrible, terrible signal, right? Like they probably get maybe outside your house. So what we did was we hunted down the best module out there. And the reason why nobody had found this before is because it's not a Zigbee module at all. It's actually just plain 802.15.4. It's not marketed as Zigbee, but it's called Snap because it's basically made by a company called Synapse. And Synapse invented a protocol called Snap. Snap is basically pretty much Zigbee, but it's their own flavor, right? It's on top of 802.15.4 just like Zigbee is. And that's the reason why nobody found this module, because it's not marketed as Zigbee, it's marketed as Snap. So when I saw it, I was like, holy crap, that's an 802.15.4 module with 3 miles line of sight for $20. Holy crap. And I can get an antenna for $2 that interfaces with this. This is awesome. So I figured out how to reverse engineer it. It's actually just an admel. Like this is,
Dollars went a long way that way.
I'm telling you, right? Like this is awesome. So I wrote specialized firmware for it, which I still have to release. I'm sorry, I'm lazy, but I'll push it out soon enough. But I also published a blog on how to reverse engineer it, which is actually super easy because again, this is just an Admel chip. So you can just wire it up to any old Admel programmer that you want, even Travis Goodspeed's GoodFet, and bam, you've got your own 3 miles with line of sight Zigbee hacking device, which is pretty sick. So that was a good use of our time. Also the Monet equipment. Who here is familiar with Monet? That's what I thought. Who's familiar with XB? Yeah, clearly. XB is great. Monet made XB. And then they said, Zigbee sucks. I want to go with something way worse. So they decided to give themselves a challenge, and they went on with the CC111 devices. So the CC111 devices are really nice Texas Instrument devices. They're also super, super cheap. It's like 433 megahertz. They do a huge range of RF, but these things are great pieces of radio. But they also have really nice whip antennas, so they actually get pretty good distance. So I wrote some firmware for that as well. Ironically, it came out exact same time as RFCat, if you're familiar with the RFCat project. They, furthering the irony of this, had a module called Don's Dongle. And the Don's Dongle variant of that software exactly fits this USB, even though it wasn't written for this USB module. So I was like, really, you've done my exact work in a different software package. So don't use my crap, use their crap, but use Don's Dongle. And that will get you a mounted device that does all the stuff you want from a CCC point of view. So, the other thing, I don't know why I didn't put that there. Anyway, if you're interested in cellular hacking and you do like CDMA stuff, but you're like, Don, I don't have a CDMA or LTE femtocell that's been hacked so that I can man in the middle, that kind of stuff. Well, ask me, and maybe I'll give you ours, because we ended up having to hack one because nobody had done it yet. So we owned a couple of different Sprint femtocells, and now we can own anything Sprint, which is great. So if you have a Sprint phone, don't worry, because that stuff's in Colorado. You don't have to worry about that. So the next generation technology, which I wish I had more time to get into, but I wasn't quite sure where we were going to be with IoT within this group, so I thought I'd go with what's kind of already been done instead of where we're going. Some of this has already been coming out, but I'd like to point out really quickly because there are some exceptional things going on here. I already mentioned the University of Michigan programs for vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure, but there are really cool things going on in just regular old crap. And what I mean by that is I lived briefly in San Francisco, and I had an office on California Street in Nob Hill, which is, well, right next to the financial district. And they had a program where they changed all their lights to RF-enabled lighting. It was freaking great because it was the exact same time that I was doing the DARPA project. So I got the little notice like, guess what? All of the traffic lights and all of the street lights in your area are going to be M2M enabled. I was like, holy crap. Who do I run and tell about this? This is the best thing ever. And the first thing that came to my mind was not street lights or traffic lights. It was, I want to recreate the scene from Hackers. I really want to do that. So I'm this close to doing it. But you can totally do that. The reason why is because of Notion. So if you haven't heard of Notion, they're a really awesome company that primarily makes RF-enabled lighting equipment. But the really cool thing about their technology is it's harvesting enabled. So it does the really cool stuff like, energy harvesting through like, small, short waves. I can't remember what's that called. Anybody remember what that is? But I don't know, like the infrared heat that you give off as a human when you walk past stuff, it can actually harvest energy from that, which is pretty sick. But because of that, it actually has a little radio chip in it that sends out signal to other modules to say like, hey, I'm starting to get energy, do this or whatever. Like change up your game a little bit, right? And because of that, you can own the crap out of them. And basically they're ownable over the CC111 chip because it's the same type of RF like OOK and all the other crappy RF technologies that you would never use anymore that for some reason are popular again in Internet of Things. So that is entirely possible. VLC is absolutely wonderful. And I want to see more things with VLC. If you're not familiar, 802.15.7 is visible light communication. So the LEDs that are in cars, this is happening, I guess, in the EU. I don't know if it's happening as much here, but in the EU it's starting to be used a lot, where the LEDs on headlights will flash to the vehicle in front of it to say, I'm speeding up, or I'm getting too close to you. And that vehicle will have sensors that will then say, crap, that person's getting too close to me. I better speed up, or doing something really stupid. So it's really cool that technology is starting to get used, but you can start thinking about all the different ways that you can use this stuff, that not just security related, but also just life enhancement related. Like one PhD student took VLC technology and was able to create a mesh of people just walking around communicating images to each other because they were all able to see each other with VLC technology during the day using high-speed LED lighting, which was fascinating. So he was able to capture like this surreal, I don't even know how many dimensions that would really be by capturing all these images at once and then interpolating them together. And it was really cool. But if you can Google it and find it, please do, because it's really interesting, fascinating stuff the way that he did it. But that's an exceptional way of using the technology in IoT to drive communication. Like we're going to see a lot more of that. And for me, the security guy, I always kind of think about my Christmas tree, and then I think like, wouldn't it be awesome if my Christmas tree was actually like relaying what I'm saying to somebody else somewhere else because they have like a way to high-speed relay audio over LED, which actually I did a proof of concept with. So it will be coming out fairly soon. Probably somebody else will do it, but my implementation kind of sucks. But regardless, you can transmit audio, albeit very, very slowly, with technology like that. Another really interesting thing that people always give me crap for is plan technology, because they never... I was talking about this for years. I was literally like, okay, plan technology is surprisingly interesting, and you're actually going to be able to use this as an interface sometime in the near future. People were like, so how much acid are you on exactly? Is that a thing? Like, no, really, this is cool. And so Disney Research, of all places, actually did the proof of concept, which I was actually exceptionally happy to see, because if any organization can abuse this stuff for the right reasons, it's definitely Disney. But a really cool thing they did is Botanicus Interacticus. That's what it's called. That's the research project name for it. And it's the research team out in Philly that did this. And basically what it does is whenever you touch the plant actually works as a capacitor and a resistor in parallel, and then chains of them. So what ends up happening is you can sense where somebody is touching on the plant, how much they're touching, what types of fingers are being used because of the thickness of where it's being touched. So that ability turns a plant into essentially a user interface. And you can see in the mirror here, they have those stupid Disney mirrors that have holograms in them. And they can see when somebody is touching the plant, it shows an aura in the mirror, right? So they can sense it and recreate it using machine learning to analyze how is the plant formed, where's the plant being touched, and how can I project that some specific way. They even have applications showing where they're touching various facets of a bamboo tree, and each time you touch it in a different spot, it's like a mouse click. Click one place twice, you're actually changing interfaces in a calendar app. So if you go online and check that stuff out, you'll be able to see how those things work together. It's fascinating stuff, but this to me is where IoT is going, right? It's putting your fish in a vehicle and letting it drive. It's having a plant that you can actually interact with like it's a computer. This is amazing stuff. But how the hell do you secure a plant? How do you hack a plant, right? Nobody really knows how do you deal with that at all. So it's fascinating to see this implemented, but this is the next step of where we're going tomorrow, right? And there is no feasible way that we have to secure anything like this. And there's no feasible way to right now, even like you said, hack it. Like how would you even hack that? So I'm so excited by this stuff because Internet of Things is the first time in a long time that we're going to see people bridge the gap of like, hey, we've got all of this crap and all of this physical stuff around us that we touch and interact with every single day, and we have no way of actually getting metrics from any of that or seeing how people really use this stuff in an effective way, right? And now with all this technology, we can actually use that to the benefit to help drive humanity really in the right direction, right? And the only way we can do that is by securing this stuff effectively to make sure that the information that's being traversed over these networks is actually sound, you know? And I think that's a really important thing for us to do, is to ensure that this information is kept sound and safe. Because really, Internet of Things is a reflection of our physical life. And computers really haven't had that bond to the human experience before. I mean, we had some semblance of an experience, a human experience in computers, but not like Internet of Things. Now we're actually seeing it, technology embracing the physical world. And it's an amazing thing. And hopefully we'll see exceptional technologies coming out of this in the near future. Securing that is absolutely imperative towards the benefit of our evolving as a people. So I really don't think that Internet of Things is about fear and loathing. And it bothered me so much when a very intelligent and otherwise well-worded peer of mine who recently called Internet of Things Internet of Threats or Internet of Terrors, I've also heard it called. I think that's so ridiculous. It's just kind of like market serving, right? Like, I'm trying to get you to buy my security services, so I'm going to tear the hell out of you. Like, that's ridiculous, right? There's no reason to do that. Because the fact is, with strategy, we can ensure that even the things that are insecure today can be made more secure through compartmentalization, through ensuring that we're using the right technologies, for ensuring that we have a long-term plan for all of the deployment of these types of technologies. Like, how are you planning the engineering, between the next 6 months or the next year or the next 5 years? Like, what's your long-term plan when cellular technologies change? When the next generation of LTE comes out, like, how are you going to handle that? And people kind of look at that as like, well, that seems like really far out there. I mean, why would we be concerned about the next LTE, the next this or that, the other thing? And it's not that you're going to anticipate what those things are. It's you're going to anticipate like, well, do we have a way to get an engineering team together to think about the security implications of that kind of stuff, right? That's the important thing to do, is have that, the versatility and the agility to be able to see new technology, be able to integrate it, but integrate it in a safe way, right? And that's what I think a lot of people have trouble understanding is, no, you don't have to understand everything that comes down. You don't have to predict the next biggest technology. You just have to be agile enough to understand how your organization is going to handle this, what your threats are, right? Build those threat models, build that strategy so that you know when that thing comes out or that thing's speculated to come out, does it affect us? And if so, how? And what are we going to do about it? And thankfully, organizations like mine and like John and other individuals can help consult about these things because our experience as security engineers gives us a unique position to have insight into how to do these things securely. So that to me is what IoT is all about. But really does only take one vulnerability, one good vulnerability, because again, like John said, I'm an old school 0-day guy, right? So I know you can have all the firewalls you want, you can have all the system permissions you want. If I've got one good kernel 0-day, and God forbid it's remote, it's game over. It doesn't matter, right? So it's good to have strategy and it's good to have everything implemented correctly. It's good to have a long-term outlook, but be aware that when you deploy systems like these, it really only does take one really, really well-designed exploit to compromise everything that you have. And what's your plan then, right? Do you have a forensics plan in place? Do you have, a way to mitigate the penetration in the near future? All those things are absolutely still relevant too. So while I think that things are getting better and the technologies are getting more refined in Internet of Things, you still have to absolutely have a strategy, even if bad things happen. It's a requirement. So, any questions? I droned on for a really long time. Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of options and a lot of security vendors working on securing things in the future.
Yeah.
If you want to start developing, not necessarily worry about the security as much, like you mentioned having a plan and being agile enough to change in the future.
Yeah.
What would you recommend as a way to get started on the creation of the actual devices?
Well, I think the first thing that you have to do is come up with a solid engineering plan. And the only thing that I mean about that is I don't mean the application that you want to develop, but integrate a security lifecycle into that device or whatever it is and say, okay, we may not have a fully fleshed out idea of what this technology is, but we understand that there is a threat model associated with what we want to build, right? And you can get help building the threat model, you can build it yourself, whatever you want to do. But identify where the weaknesses and where the risks are most apparent, right? And then identify what the risks are that you think may never occur. Like what's the least likely scenario? And then scale them appropriately and say, okay, well, where do I prioritize? And then you can put your time to what's most effective for you and what's most practical for you and where you're really going to get the biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah, so then when something comes out that addresses those largest issues, you can switch over.
Yeah, you already either have a mitigation plan in place or you at least know where to start,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, because you can circle back and say, hey, engineers, I have thoughts about how to solve these security problems. This issue is going to interact with these security problems. I may not have a concrete solution today, but because we have a threat model, we can identify a roadmap for what that should look like, and then you go, right down the road until you're set.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Can we talk a little bit about the threat model when you start building these IoT devices?
Yeah.
Because you started to present this idea that, when I write secure software for the desktop today, I assume that the code is going to execute per the instructions that I implemented. But you presented the idea that the hardware may not perform the executions that I asked it to perform.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you make the argument that remote is more dangerous than physical access, which is at the opposite. So if I'm trying to build a realistic, let's say short-term threat model, what is it? What do I need to protect against now, and what do I need to protect against in the future?
Right.
What does the security threat model for IoT look like?
Sure. It's completely different for every device, right? I would love to tell you that there is some solid plan that I could just spit out that would help everybody out. But the only solid plan is that there's identification of different components in your network or in your deployment model. And those different components have varied risk, right? That's really the only thing I can say that's concrete. Everything else is dependent on your design. Does your design involve people? Or does your design actually, just involve infrastructure? Does it provide information for people, or does it provide access to physical switches, things, relays, whatever, right? Every implementation is very different. So you have to identify all the security concerns for those implementations case by case, right? Internet of Things is almost like dealing with people from a security perspective, because again, you're dealing with the physical world, right? And every person's different. It's like every application is different. Whereas in a desktop environment, you can say, well, it's a desktop environment. It's running in Linux, it's running in Windows, it's got these security protections, non-exec stack, randomized heap, whatever, right? You can count on things in those environments. With Internet of Things, it's so random that you don't necessarily know what your risk model is until you've picked the components and the deployment model of what your specific application is.
Can I push on that a little harder and possibly with a bit of a pessimistic attitude?
Sure.
Because what you essentially said is that you can't build a reliable threat model, you can't build security until you have your application, until you have your thing. So whatever you're going to build, you have to come up with it, and then you have to have an expert in security analyze it. But at the same
That's
time,
not what I'm saying.
But at the same time, you're saying that the Internet of Things are people who are hacking together stuff in their basement, making it work and saying, this is cool, let's sell it. What are the odds that this person is capable of doing this deep security analysis? How do you get these two fields to actually work together and actually build something that's going to work?
I'm so glad you brought that up. Because Mark here and Zach and I are actually working on that very thing.
All right.
So we're putting together sort of a consortium of individuals and organizations that have a very deep understanding of Internet of Things technology. And we're going to allow the community, guys in their basement, small organizations, whatever, to say, hey, I want to build this. What's the most safe way to build this? And the idea, and I came up with this when I was doing my DARPA research, is that you actually have a list of available components that are often used today, right? You can list them all out because, they're there, they're on the market, people know what they are. You can say, these are the vulnerabilities that we know about in these particular technologies. Point and click on what you're using. Put it into a configuration, say these are the things that I'm using. Well, now you know these are all the vulnerabilities that are associated with these particular components, right? Or are you choosing to use GSM? Well, here's the ways you can get owned. Are you using CDMA? Here are the ways you can get owned, and so on and so forth. But without that information, it's not like I can say here's a threat model for you, buddy. I'll just toss it right out to you. It doesn't really work that way. You can pre-can some of the threat model aspects with pre-known components that have been audited, but until you put them together, they don't really mean much, right? If you've got a guy in the basement that wants to put all these things together, great, good for him. If he's capable of doing all that security work himself, great, good for him. It's probably Zach. But otherwise, they're going to have a centralized place where people can say, I have these issues, these components in this way, put together in this way. What are my reasonable threats? And we're absolutely working on that idea.
I think the hard thing is what's appropriate. I mean, that's part of the threat modeling, but what's appropriate for my application where it's Mark's favorite egg tray that syncs to your iPhone to tell you when you're out of eggs at the store.
Unrealistic. Oh wait.
Oh, it already
It's a thing, actually.
Yeah.
There's certainly different security requirements or sort of security expectations of that or impact if there is vulnerability. And when you're designing something, people just don't understand a lot of times what the impact is of the IoT device that they're creating.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree with that. And I think we can go really far with the idea that Zach and Mark have come up with this consortium of sorts. But I also think that this just boils down to talk to your community. We have to engage people and say you're building things that are going to impact people's lives now. You really have to be cognizant of if you're building for a community, you have to engage that community. So make sure that you take the time to reach out to people like myself and in security, or just reach out to other engineers and say, what have you experienced? Until we get people actually actively saying that, we're always going to have vulnerable things. The other important thing is getting the network operators involved as well, right? A really good example of that is AT&T. AT&T has taken a very strong step on not only Internet of Things technology, but on just regular cellular mobile technology in general. They are now saying, if you want to put something on our network, it will be audited. And it will be audited by people that we trust. If you don't want that to happen, you're not going on our network. So we have to keep in mind that there almost needs to be some sort of organization or management group that says, if you want to build an Internet of Things device, you have to get certified or whatever through us. And if that means that you need a security architecture review, it's going to happen. Right? We need to get to that point. Because you're right, today, where people are building stuff in their basement, I'm all for the guy building in the basement because I'm one of those guys. But I also don't want to be using that guy's car mod to drive to the store. That's not the guy I want to be putting my dog in a car. Right? Yeah. So we'll get there.
I think some of the ZMAP guys are actually here. And I know Colin Mulliner had done a presentation a couple of years ago at CanSec where they scanned a bunch of interwebs
Yeah.
and found like traffic control systems and a bunch of other GSM things hanging off the network.
Oh yeah.
Did you guys look externally in any of the research versus like internally reverse engineering?
No, we're kind of against the whole like we're gonna scan random stuff. And the reason why is because in Internet of Things, like you can do some really crappy stuff with really crappy software. Some of the basebands are so flaky that if you hit them with Nmap, they'll just straight up crash. So we didn't want to just reach out and say like, hey, Internet, where are you? You know, because I have no idea if that's a traffic control light in Russia, and we've all seen how they drive. So God forbid, that's not going on me. That's not going to happen. So no, we didn't want to do that. Yes, sir.
Have you found any device that's reasonably secure that you were impressed with its performance? Or has everything been kind of a disappointment?
I wouldn't say disappointment. I think that's the wrong phrase to use. We have been able to own everything we've touched. But that's also because we have a lot of experience, you know. So I mean, I really wouldn't. If you put up a device that hasn't been, security reviewed by John or Zach or Mark, we're probably going to own it. And even if it has been reviewed by these guys, there are certain things that you just can't get around. So you have to kind of have that trade-off, right? Like if, Don Bailey or Zach or whoever is going to go after this device, then we're screwed, right? Because there are just certain things that you can't take care of, like especially in hardware. Like there are certain attacks that you're just not going to get around, you know? So it really boils down to like, again, your threat model. Like what's the expected return of you performing this security enhancement, right? Can you do some kind of enhancement to a UART channel where it's fully encrypted on both sides, where it can't be man in the middle, so that people can either impersonate or sniff certain kinds of tokens? Probably not, because that's super expensive. The only people who do that are government, and even they don't do it half the time, right? So again, like it's just a trade-off. Like if you think the threat model is us, then you're going to throw tons of money at something that's just never going to be secured. If you think the threat model is, the chick in New Zealand who wants to watch TV, you can probably stop her, right? But the realistic threat model is that there's an attacker in the middle that's a little bit more malicious, but you can stop him because you're going to cause his expense to be so high, right? His or her expense is going to be so high in hacking whatever that thing is that they're going to go on to something else that's going to be more cost effective for them, right? And this is the kind of like the Russian mafia theory. Like if the Russian mafia has to throw tens and thousands of dollars of 0-day at something, they're going to be, no, let's go clone cards again.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, you make it not worth their while and they'll move on to something else. Right? Anybody else? No? Well, there's one last thing, because I'm really big into virtual currencies lately.
Wow, such currency.
Such currency. I'm glad you said that, because I have free Dogecoins. So I was not expecting this many people to show up, so thanks. I appreciate it. But I only have 20 Dogecoin wallets, so I'll just hand some of these out. But these all have 100 Dogecoins, so not that much. It's about 12 cents American. But that's a pretty hefty sum to start out with, and you never know, man. Dogecoin to the moon. So there's also one of these, I don't know which one, so you might get it, has an extra 8,000 Dogecoins on it. So you actually could get enough to maybe get a sandwich or something. But it's a little thank you to say thanks for coming to the talk. I appreciate it, and thanks for listening to me for so long.